And we're live with episode 15 of a podcast for all seasons. Been a little bit since we've been on the air. We got a little bit of news to talk about, some other kind of developments, information about everything from Batman versus Superman to we're going to talk Fox and Marvel. Not necessarily the same or the two entity, as is kind of the purpose of our discussion. And a couple other little things. Let's go over to my host with the most, Mr. Eric Joseph. What's up, Eric?
Hi, Josh, and hi to all our listeners. This is Eric Joseph of DarkKnightNews.com, ComicBookMovie.com, and Multiverse Entertainment. And this episode ushers in a new era here on Podcast for All Seasons because I finally have a new, better computer that I've talked about in recent episodes, have finally upgraded. We don't have to worry about time delays between each other. We can talk fluidly, but hopefully we don't have any noise cancellation if anyone talks at the same time. If it's that, we'll totally blame Google+, but things are running very smoothly so far. So we kind of wanted to do this episode as a bit of a test run before we have another guest on the show, because we're hoping to have another one on the next episode, and I'll talk a little more about that at the close of this episode. Basically, we've got just a few bits and pieces around the comic book and entertainment realms to talk about this week. Just so we've said before that we don't do episodes for the sake of doing them, and even though this is a test run, we've got a few things to talk about, and I'm sounding a bit redundant, so I'm going to move on to our first topic. This week we got our first official look at Henry Cavill in his new Superman costume in Batman vs. Superman Dawn of Justice. It looks like part of the background might be a matte or a Photoshop job. He's on a rainy rooftop, presumably in Gotham City. What interests me most, and this is a bit of a side note, when Kevin Smith said he first saw Ben Affleck's Batman in costume last fall, Zack Snyder showed him a picture of the two characters together on a rooftop. I'm kind of thinking this is half of a photograph, and maybe we'll see the Batman half of it in the very near future, because our only look at Ben Affleck so far has been in a monochromatic picture in front of the Batmobile. So although we know the costume is black and gray, we've yet to see him in all his full color glory. So that will be exciting to see, and we'll probably see set photos leaked pretty soon. But you may have to do a side-by-side comparison with the Man of Steel suit. I do like this one a little more. It's a bit more streamlined. Some people weren't able to spot the differences. The S is slightly smaller. You can see the texture's a little different on it. It looks more like the Stone S logo that was used for Man of Steel promotions. I can't quite tell if it's a brighter yellow or if it's just red on blue, because we were trying to, Josh and I were talking on the phone the other day, like, is this just the way the light's hitting it, or is there actually yellow in the logo? But I guess we'll know soon enough as more pictures are inevitably leaked and shown of Henry Cavill, official or unofficial. And then you can see the textures around the wrists and the waist are slightly different, and then the belt buckle, if you want to call it that, is now more square than circular as it was in the previous film. And his haircut's a little bit tighter, and he looks like he might have gained even more muscle mass this time around. He just looks even more like Superman in this movie, if that's even possible. And of course, earlier in the week, we got a look at him as Clark Kent for the first time, doing a photo for charity, sans glasses, though. Zack Snyder spoke a bit with USA Today, who revealed the photo of Cavill, and he was just going on and saying that he felt this was an organic continuation with having Batman in it, and he likes the prospect of seeing a crusty old Batman beating the snot out of guys, as it were. I think Josh has the article pulled up, so if he wants to fill anyone in when he chimes in. He can say a little more, but I, I think maybe having an older Batman, even though he's in his prime, I mean, still in his 40s, so it's not like a relaunched Batman is necessarily near the end of his career. There's still some vitality there. It's good that Snyder decided to just have a Batman that's going to hit the ground running. He said people have known this character for 75 years, so we don't have to worry as much about retelling his origin yet again. The drag of continuity, let's just jump right into Batman. But not to get too sidetracked here, but when they eventually do a solo Batman movie after Justice League, they could easily do a prequel film and show us the background of this Batman. Who knows? Or it could just, be set in the present. But it's an exciting time for DC on film, and he also said something about the title in the film. It's a V as opposed to a VS, so it's not as an in-your-face versus in the film. Uh, Maybe Snyder put it a little more eloquently. Josh can probably pull up the exact quote in a moment. But it really seems like they're going to fight at some point in the film. But yes, they're ultimately teaming up because it's leading to Justice League. But uh, before I say anything, or who knows, maybe I've said all I have to say, unless Josh's words make me want to bring up another point about the suit. But Josh, it's your favorite character. What do you think of Superman's new look?
Yeah, Henry Cavill's he definitely looks extremely Superman-esque in this one. If you look at actually, there was an Empire magazine cover cover shot of the suit from Man of Steel, and the shots are nearly identical. There's only a slightly more profiled shot of the chest and the emblem in the new screenshot for Batman versus Superman, and yeah, I mean the differences are minute enough that it looks pretty much like the same suit to the casual viewer. Kind of like Christian Bale's suit looked very similar to people from Dark Knight to Dark Knight Rises, which Eric had mentioned to me the other day, and
But
the differences are so minute.
more changes.
Yeah, there's definitely more significant changes, but what I'm saying is to the casual viewer, the changes will for the most part, go unnoticed. But yeah, the gauntlets are a little bit less like gauntlets. It almost looks like bracing, kind of going further up the forearm. It actually reminds me of really old school Superman costumes. If you've seen like people, Superman fans, and or even like old Golden Age comic book fans, people who are familiar with popular Golden Age covers and things like that. It reminds me of um, the old Superman shots where you saw like lacing up instead of boots. It was almost like very short shoes. And then lacing up the calf. This kind of reminds me of that. It's almost like bracing or lacing up the forearm instead of like a short gauntlet right on the wrist. It is a more streamlined look, and then the bracing around the ribs and whatnot it's definitely it's got a less instead of like a solid rubberized looks kind of like a rubberized bracing around the sides. It looks more, I guess, aerodynamic, for lack of a better word. It cuts at angles. It's not as fluid, but it makes it look sleeker in the same vein. And like Eric said, the Superman symbol may be slightly smaller. That could have just been the lighting and the shading and whatnot. It looks like it has a slightly more broad ridge around the S emblem, but it looks more like the glyph version of the symbol, like it was seen in the poster art, whereas you can kind of see dimensions to the symbol. It definitely looks. I'm looking at a high res shot, and it definitely looks like it's red on yellow. I don't think that there's really any questioning that, but the buckle is more squared than the rounded buckle. I actually definitely agree with Eric that it's a improvement on the suit, although a very minor, significant differences. It is an improvement. And Henry Cavill, he doesn't actually look much bigger compared to like the Empire photo shot from Man of Steel, but the guy is just a friggin' behemoth. I mean, I just every time I watched Man of Steel the other day, I just hadn't seen it in a while, and I had some spare time to sit around and just watch a movie, and it was like, I haven't seen Man of Steel in a while, so it's just that guy is a absolute hulking beast, and this shot was a really cool profile shot. I do think it's funny that people seem to be, I mean, the internet being what it is, I've seen it memed already. It's like Superman with, a gigantic smile on his face and a bunch of balloons and, embracing Batman's, the sad Batman one is one that's already gained some significant infamy. And I do think it's funny. I mean, I think it's ironic that you don't kind of see that same kind of nitpicking for, say, the Spider-Man costume, or even like Electro. I mean, some people made fun of it, but as far as what Eric had mentioned about the Sniper, well, I'll say that in a second. I guess the last thing I'll say is it's a really good suit. I mean, I enjoyed the Superman suit quite a bit. I mean, people have bitched and complained about the fact that he doesn't have the briefs, and I don't think that the briefs being gone is a significant departure. I mean, it's definitely a more grown-up look. Obviously, the whole, shorts being separate. I think that the most significant thing that people do have a problem with is without the belt kind of cutting the costume in half, it does make it have an unusual look of like a single unitard like bodysuit, which is a little unusual, I'll admit. But if you've seen the new 52 Batman, or I'm sorry, Superman, where he's got the red belt, which is distinctly cutting the costume in half, I think this is a little bit more in that vein. So it's a marked improvement, although not a significant one. And I don't think it's so much that it's going to make a difference to people who didn't like Man of Steel, or to people who did like Man of Steel, one way or the other. But as far as Snyder's comments, yeah, he mentioned about the suit, and or rather, he was questioned after the pictures of the suit were released, and he talked a bit about Man of Steel's sequel, Batman v Spider-Man, or Batman v Spider-Man. We're going into some alternate reality. Yeah, what is this? This is like 1960s comics.
They said that on the Today Show, if you remember, when Jesse Eisenberg was on like a month or so ago. I don't remember who was interviewing him, but
yeah, Batman versus Spider-Man.
Yeah, and I heard he just had this priceless look on his face.
Everyone's patiently waiting for that movie. The fanboys are gonna go nuts. No, Batman v Superman. It's quite literally it's Batman v Superman, not versus period Superman, and he mentioned that specifically. And Snyder essentially said in his article that it's going to be a further exploration of expansion of the universe, and what he had mentioned specifically was that although it's a subtle difference, it is less overtly a versus movie with just the V versus the or rather I should say rather than the VS for versus. It's just I mean, I think maybe he's just I don't know, saving face for people who don't care for the versus title. Me and Eric have talked probably, till we're blue in the face about this subject matter personally, and we've probably talked about it enough on this podcast that, we don't think Batman and Superman should be at odds. I think that, I mean, I probably have said it before, but if I haven't stated it overtly, I think that the very concept of Frank Miller's perception of Superman is a fundamental misunderstanding of the character, or bastardization even. And I dare say even his understanding of Batman is a significant departure from what Batman has definitely been, come to be stand not only stand for, but also the idea that they would get into a literally knockdown, drag out fight to the death is absurd in every fashion. And I hope that it does not come to that. I think that if anyone wants to see a legitimate scenario for Batman versus Superman that is comic book accurate to, it's an amalgamation of ideas that have been seen in the comic books every single time Superman and Batman have met, and it is actually the animated films. It was, I believe, I think it was in Superman the animated series, but it was technically a dual movie. It was Batman comes to Metropolis, and they end up fighting, Lex Luthor and the Joker. And when they meet, it's your classic, hey, I don't know who this guy is. I've heard about you. As far as I was concerned, you were an urban legend. But here you are in my city. Hey, Superman, or hey, Batman, you're really roughing up these guys. Why don't you calm it down a little bit? And, a fight ensues. It's a very minor fight, and it's based on essentially a lack of understanding and the whole idea that they're after the same goal, which is, AKA in this case Dawn of Justice. They're both characters who deeply believe in and want justice, true justice. I think that may be the only thing that kind of lacked in Man of Steel, was that we didn't see Superman as the idealized version of Superman in terms of, truth, justice, and the American way kind of thing. I mean, they definitely hearkened to, he wants to be true to himself, and he wants to be, fight for those who need to be protected. But they didn't really play on the idea that, like, this great sense of justice and, in the character. So hopefully they flesh that out more in this film. But Batman obviously stands for that significantly. It's, the character is literally birthed from tragedy, and it's the concept of, if the great justice or the great injustice is that Batman had this horrible thing happen to him, and his entire goal is to, keep it from ever happening to anybody else, whereas it will never stop this horrible tragedy from having happened to him. So, yeah, that's so well played out in this animated film, and I believe it was 3 episodes combined into like a short movie,
Yeah,
maybe.
World's Finest.
Yeah, World's Finest. Well, yeah, it was called World's Finest,
Yeah,
obviously, and
when it was when they combined it into a movie for home video release, they just called it the Batman Superman movie.
because people won't understand what World's Finest means. Apparently, that's the thinking that Warner Brothers has, and people were really hoping it was going to be called, Superman Batman World's Finest, or Batman Superman World's Finest, or even Superman versus Batman, or the other way around, World's Finest, because it was a long, long, long running comic book. Although that's a comic book that probably went out of regular print in the 50s. Maybe even 60s, but either way. I'm rambling a little bit, so I'll wrap that up. But Snyder's didn't bring anything new information as far as, other than the fact that he has not yet shot Gal Gadot. That was actually the juiciest bit of information
As
that he
Wonder
gave us.
Woman.
Yeah, as Wonder Woman. He has not shot her as Wonder Woman. We know that she's been shot as Princess Diana, or Diana of Themyscira, or Diana Prince. We don't know, but we know that she's been shot because the released leaked photos of her on set have been seen. So we know that she's been shot as at least the human side of Diana, or the non-Wonder Woman side of her. So that was actually some pretty big news, as far as those must be kind of later scenes. Well, they don't have to necessarily be later scenes in the film, but they're going to be shot later in terms of principal photography. There has been quite a bit of news in that. You want to talk about that at all, Eric? As far as like some of the pictures and rumors and things like that?
We've pretty much talked about the latest rumors in our last episode because not too much has developed since Jason Momoa was cast as Aquaman. One thing you might want to look at, we've got a new weekly thing out over at darkknightnews.com. My colleague Adam is doing it on Sundays. It's basically he's going to pull together any set photos that have been posted during the week that maybe someone else hasn't gotten around to posting. It's going to kind of be the week in Batman versus Superman photos. So that's something you can look forward to every Sunday if you may have missed any photos from the set. One thing that was interesting in the USA Today article, it seemingly confirmed Ray Fisher as Cyborg. I mean, granted, he's been said to be cast in the role in Cyborg by many respectable Hollywood trades, but as we know, as a cameo character, Warner Brothers has never issued a press release. But USA Today, being an outlet that they've broken this significant photo through, them saying Ray Fisher is playing Cyborg, and Warner Brothers and DC Comics have a close eye on whatever's in that article, and if the journalist said something that they probably didn't want to be said, they would have told him to edit it. But yeah, at this point, we're all accepting that Ray Fisher is indeed Cyborg. Just a few notes on what you had to say when you were talking about Batman and Superman fighting in animation. Of course, we all refer to the Batman Superman movie or World's Finest, whatever you want to call it. There was also, I don't know how well you remember this one. I showed it to you on DVD years ago. It was the two-part season 5 premiere of The Batman. It was called, I believe, The Batman Superman Story, parts 1 and 2. And it introduced the Superman character into that world of continuity, also voiced by George Newbern, who is my personal favorite animated Superman voice. And then, of course, it was cool to see them have Clancy Brown do Lex Luthor, the definitive voice of Lex Luthor in animation, I'd say. But if you remember how they fought in that episode, Superman was kind of corrupted by Lex Luthor, who used kryptonite with Poison Ivy's pheromones, and it was putting Superman in this state of confusion, and he was, subordinate to Lex until Batman found a way to neutralize the effect. And they had more of what you would call a superpowered SmackDown than what we had seen on World's Finest, when it was just basically them slapping each other around a bar for 10, 20 seconds. It was more of what you would think it was, though. It almost did rival what we saw in the Dark Knight Returns animated movie, though. But I do have to agree with you that I don't like Superman as portrayed by Frank Miller. I did like how in the animated movie he wasn't as much of a government stooge. I mean, he was still working for the administration, but they didn't. The animated movie was a little more respectful to Superman than the comic book was, but I always say I don't care if it's considered comic book blasphemy. I'm not a fan of Frank Miller's Batman altogether. Year One's probably my favorite work he did, and that's the most heroic I consider any of his Batman works to be. I do like The Dark Knight Returns, but I like it more as a story, not a Batman story per se, if that makes sense. I don't like Psycho Batman. Like I said, I like The Dark Knight Returns. I just wouldn't put it amongst my favorite Batman stories. Dark Knight Strikes Again, of course, not that great. And then All-Star Batman and Robin, the Boy Wonder, a.k.a. Frank Miller, shits on the DC Universe. He disrespected so many characters in that book. Even Batman, you could say, just too unhinged, and quite frankly, I don't care if they ever finish the story. But All-Star Batman's a good buy if you get it as a trade paperback and you just want a very good Jim Lee art book. That's what I call it. You don't even need the dialogue. It's just some nice Jim Lee art. The story is just very disjointed, and I think it's kind of funny that even now, since they put out the Absolute Edition, issue 10 still hasn't been collected. It's still issues 1 through 9, but issue 10 probably was the worst issue. But for completionists who want this as a collection, they'd still have to go out and buy the singular issue if they want to read the. Can't really say the whole story, but everything that's been put to paper. Before we move on to our next subjects, anything else you want to say about Batman and Superman?
I was actually going to comment that Justice League War was actually a pretty decent. I think it's the most realistic in terms of like if we see a Batman Superman confrontation, what it would really be like. It was taken from the pages of the first Justice League in the New 50, the first Justice League collected in the New 52. It was essentially Batman and the Green Lantern just throwing every single thing that they had at Superman, and he was kind of like, "Is that all you got?" And and then I think Green Lantern like hits him with a train all of a sudden out of nowhere. I mean, he's not invulnerable, like utterly and totally invulnerable. Like Golden Age Superman, where it was like the guy could be hit by a train and not be moved. But I think that if they really want to respect the character of Superman, that he should be very difficult to hurt for a normal human. I mean, obviously they've significantly nerfed Superman's powers in Man of Steel, and I understand that the reasons why they did that and why they did it in the animated series is because you otherwise how do you make believable threats for Superman, and that's been the problem for Superman for ages. I mean, but the other thing on the other side of that is that no one asks how do you make credible threats for the Silver Surfer? How do you make credible threats for any other extreme power level hero? Well, you tell good stories is how you do it. It has nothing to do with whether or not he can fight a significant threat. But I think if you're respecting Superman in this case, a human's going to have to literally throw everything at him, including the kitchen sink, to keep him from just murdering a normal human. And the person to do it is Batman, and hopefully we finally get Bat God, I guess is what he's referenced as, and kind of as a joke in the comics community, which is essentially the Batman that we've seen in, say, the Arkham games. This is a Batman that has every utility at his expense. He's a complete and total genius. He is a master tactician and a master detective. He's got levels of stamina and endurance and strength, and that completely and totally exceed anything that's human, but quote unquote he's human. It's so hopefully we'll get to see a really comic book accurate Batman finally. Some people will be like, what do you mean a comic book Bat? We saw it in Batman 89, or we saw it in the Dark Knight trilogy. No, we've never seen Batman as he is in the comics on live action film. And so hopefully this does it. But again, the last thing I'll say about that is hopefully they make it a legitimate fight. I don't want Superman getting smacked around like a bitch by Batman. I think it's disrespectful to the character. It's also completely and totally unrealistic, and it's laughable because how do you make it so that like, oh yeah, Superman got beat by a human, unless he's pulling out that kryptonite ring. I just don't see it happening. Hopefully that the fight obviously shifts pace to, listen, Lex Luthor's pinning us against each other. He's the real villain here. Yada yada yada. It's a 20 minutes of them, breaking shit and then being the best of friends or something. But that's another story for another day. We're obviously going to find out when the movie comes out, and everyone's waiting with bated breath. But yeah, why don't we move on to Fox? We were going to talk about Marvel and Fox, not Marvel's Fox universe, which we've spoken about before. And Eric's noticed some developments as far as very subtle things. Like I said, we keep our ear to the ground in a lot of different places and in a lot of different facets. And most people, they pay attention to, say, movie rumors or casting rumors and things about the movies proper. And we'd got a little bit of information from, I believe it was a what show was it, Eric? Was it a it was some type of solicitor's show for merchandising? Was that correct?
Licensing Expo.
Licensing expo. So why don't you let our folks know what exactly kind of had transpired there and what it potentially means, and we'll get into the rest of it.
Well, before I go into the meat of what I'm going to say, you you may remember we talked a bit about this back at around the end of episode 13, which was I believe our X-Men Days of Future Past episode about a month ago, give or take, when we started to hear that Marvel was kind of blacking out titles that Fox had the cinematic rights to. I don't want to necessarily repeat everything we said in that episode, but we've got to say some stuff for the benefit of people who didn't hear episode 13. Uh, Basically, as you know, Fox has the rights to X-Men and Fantastic Four. Disney has most characters, and Sony has Spider-Man. Uh, Marvel has a better relationship with Sony than they do Fox, but the current head honcho at Marvel apparently has made some decisions to lock out properties that Fox has in a certain way. You're seeing more Marvel Comics events and promotions deal with characters that you're going to see in Marvel Studios films. Therefore, you're going to see more with Iron Man and other Avengers, and now Guardians of the Galaxy. Spider-Man is still okay, as I said. They have a decent relationship with Sony. Uh, X-Men books won't be canceled. They still sell well, but you won't see as much of a crossover focus on X-Men characters. They're certainly cool with killing Wolverine, which, no death is necessarily impermanent, or I should say permanent in comic books, but who knows? It's a Fox character at the movies. Movie characters don't necessarily need comic books to endure because, as we've said on the show, comic books are comic sales are a fraction of what box office returns are. And then Fantastic Four, Marvel was said to have been canceling their titles, and Marvel said, no, this is preposterous, it's not happening. And then 2 weeks later, they announced Ultimate FF is getting canceled. The only thing left to be canceled is the regular in continuity 616 universe Fantastic Four book. Bleeding Cool, who seems to have people buried or connections deep into the comic book industry, has said maybe Fantastic Four's flagship title won't be canceled, but it's possible to go on hiatus when movie promotion heats up summer 2015. I can see that happening. But I think we've said before how we think it's ridiculous that they're snubbing 50-year-old beloved characters just to give a middle finger to Fox. It's quite ridiculous. But as Josh was talking about the licensing expo, there's a graphic, and if you're just happening across us on YouTube and you want to see a picture of what we're talking about, go to the article I'm going to embed this in over at multiverseentertainment.wordpress.com. If you're happening across us on Facebook, you're going to get a link to that article anyway. But I'll put a picture from the licensing expo of Marvel properties that were being advertised for live action and animated. As you may or may not know, Marvel has its current animated series over on Disney XD. They have shows like Ultimate Spider-Man, Avengers Assemble, and Hulk and the Agents of Smash. And then the interesting thing is that there was one that said Marvel's Wolverine. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 was also up there. It didn't have the Marvel logo next to it, but there was no mention of X-Men Days of Future Past or Fantastic Four. But it's looking like Disney still doesn't mind cashing in on the Wolverine character. He's essentially, the golden boy and moneymaker of anyone in the X-Men franchise. And when you go to a toy store now, there has not been a toy line or official merchandise line for any X-Men movie since X-Men Origins Wolverine in 2009. I I guess that didn't register with me until recently, and then someone brought it up. Longtime comic book artist and writer Rob Liefeld has confirmed online that he's heard about Marvel wanting to lock out Fox characters, and at a time where they could be selling a lot of X-Men Days of Future Past toys, you're going to see Guardians of the Galaxy figures because it shows kids what's important, so to speak. These are the characters you should be buying, support Disney, yada yada. Of course, we're going into more of my phrasing than Rob Liefeld's, so don't take these as direct quotes of his, though you can probably find his quotes somewhere online. Anyway, when you look at toys for Marvel characters, you may see X-Men characters, in their classic comic book line of toys. And then there's a Wolverine figure for the Avengers Assemble series. I haven't kept up with that series because I absolutely can't stand it. I gave up. Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes was an awesome series that was pretty much Marvel's answer to Justice League Unlimited. Avengers Assemble is pretty much like watching a kid smash together some action figures for 22 minutes. There's pretty much no story. It's just cutesy jokes. Good old Disney superhero fun. Same thing with Hulk and the Agents of Smash, which kind of surprises me because Paul Dini's name's on that show, and Hulk and the Agents of Smash is just cutesy jokes and fighting something for 22 minutes, and it's over. No story. If you'd like to know my thoughts on Ultimate Spider-Man, I actually did enjoy the first season. The second season I thought was okay, but there was a lot more hawking toys, you could say. Spider-Man's on a motorcycle for some reason. Season 3 seems to be more influenced by the Spider-Verse arc in comic books. I'll still check it out, being someone that has enjoyed Ultimate Spider-Man to varying extents, but I'll give the Wolverine show a chance if it does pan out, and it probably will, because I love Wolverine, and I'm guessing Steve Blum will continue to voice the character, but I wouldn't doubt if it follows suit with the other Marvel shows, and it's just knockdown, drag 'em outs for the duration, and not much in the way of depth. There also apparently might be a Guardians of the Galaxy animated series coming up, so if that film flops, that's certainly going to be an animated series with merchandising tie-ins that may not be lucrative, but Marvel assumedly wants to do a Guardians of the Galaxy 2 film, so I guess we'll know if it works out for them in a few weeks. But anything you would like to add about this whole Fox Marvel deal and the possibility of Disney still wanting to do at least a Wolverine series? Because before I hand it back to you, let me just remind you that yes, Fox has the live-action film rights to the X-Men and Fantastic Four, but Disney can do them in animated form. Fox's rights are only extend to live-action. Okay, Josh, what do you have to say?
Well, this is kind of like will maybe sound like a little bit like a tangent, but I remember when I got the collected edition of Superman. They came out with a special edition a few years back after Superman Returns came out, and the reason I mention this is because what I noted was, you have these iconic classic original Superman films. A lot of people still consider Chris Reeves the original Superman, and it was Superman the movie, Superman 2, Superman 3, Superman 4, and then it was Bryan Singer's Superman Returns. And I was kind of like, what a fucking narcissist. I mean, don't get me wrong. I know that he's a a well liked actor or I'm sorry, well liked director, or at least he was a well liked director. He's obviously financially successful. He's did wonders on the X-Men series and all this other stuff. But I was like, man, do they have to plaster his name? And every single time you see that film's name, it's Bryan Singer's Superman Returns. Bryan Singer's Superman Returns. And the first thing I noted when I saw the Bleeding Cool article that mentions the licensing expo was it's Marvel's Ultimate Spider-Man, Marvel's Avengers Assemble, Marvel's Captain America, the Winter Soldier, Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy, Marvel's Hulk, The Ages of Smash, Marvel's Thor: The Dark World, and it's like, yeah, we fucking get it. Obviously, these are Marvel products, and I mean,
Are you sure it's not Dark Horse's Avengers or maybe IDW's Wolverine?
Yeah, IDW, Boom Comics is Wolverine. No, I mean it just seems like I get that you're branding your stuff, and I guess if it was even subtle, if you had I mean, the DC logo is just that. It's a logo. It's not just, hey, DC Comics, bam, their huge logo just spread across there. And if anyone's seen Cinema Sins, they do several, kind of almost parody videos, pointing out fallacies in films and things like that. And one of the things that he always knocks on is when essentially they're telling you the product brand before you even get to the film, and it's kind of like one of the ones that I always see is is DC Comics, and it kind of like joking at the fact that it's like, yeah, we know that it's DC Comics, like you don't need to remind us every time we see a Batman movie. Maybe that is for the purpose of the average viewer who doesn't know who these products belong to. I mean, I get that these are owned products, owned characters essentially, so you want people to know. But Amazing Spider-Man 2, it's the only one on the entire list that doesn't have Marvel's The Amazing Spider-Man 2, and it's like they're trying to indicate that the brand is not produced essentially, although it's owned by Marvel, ultimately it's not produced by Marvel Studios or now Disney's Marvel Studios, I guess. And I mean, at that point, I guess I'm a little shocked that the ultimate narcissist, Disney, is not shoving their logo down our throats every time we see a new Marvel film, because now that they own Marvel, why isn't it, Disney's Marvel Wolverine? Why isn't it Disney's Marvel Guardians of the Galaxy? But obviously the most significant thing that we're seeing is the complete lack of X-Men support. It's just a slap in the face. The complete lack of Fantastic Four support. I mean, Guardians of the Galaxy is a ways off, and no support. Well, it was a ways off. I mean, it's obviously getting closer and closer now. But I saw a kid the other day walking around with the Guardians of the Galaxy backpack, and I was like, why do these kids want a Guardians of the Galaxy backpack? Because they saw a fucking trailer? I mean, it's not like this little kid. I mean, and when I say little kid, I'm talking like 5, 6, 7 years old max. I highly, highly doubt that this little kid is reading Guardians of the Galaxy comic books. Spider-Man, sure. Captain America, sure. Iron Man, why not? Thor, okay. Wolverine, absolutely. These are characters that are well known and have been well known for a while amongst comic book fans, and obviously children watch animation, and those characters have been just shoved down their throats in animation for a while as well. So, but Guardians of the Galaxy kind of stood out to me. It was just like, why are I mean, this is just the new cool hip thing that kids are doing. I guess it must be, but I thought that the most poignant thing was the lack of the X-Men support and the lack of the Fantastic Four support. If their desire is marketing, and it is, because they're a business, if their desire is marketing, then why are you not trying to market one of the film franchises that has such an extraordinarily large marketable list of people, I guess, for lack of a better way of saying it. I mean, you always hear, oh yeah, why does Ultimate Spider-Man have Spider-Man on a fucking bike, a motorcycle? Why does he need a motorcycle in general? It's like the Superman in a car. I mean, sure, granted, we've seen Superman in you know, a deep space vehicle because yes, he can't breathe air in space. There's no air in space, and he can hold his breath relatively infinitely. But okay, sure, if he's got to be in space for 3 months, yeah, he'll be in a vehicle because otherwise he'd die. But why does Superman need to ride in a buggy, a dune buggy, which I've seen before? I don't remember when. It was like it's just this like laughable. Why does the Flash need a car? He can run at the speed of light, but let's put him in a vehicle that in no way can obtain this quality of speed that the Flash is innate with. Um, because they want to sell toys is the long and short answer of it. So then the question becomes, why do they not want to sell an endless litany of X-Men toys? You got like 12 to 15 characters in the cast proper. And if you're like, Captain America, the Winter Soldier's most recent toy foray, guess what? Let's throw in 5 or 6 characters who weren't even in the fucking movie. I mean, they do it with every single animated or live-action film. They throw in, obviously, all of the characters who are in the main film, and then they threw a couple supplementary characters. It's why there was a Crimson Dynamo figure in the Iron Man 2 line. That's why there was a Whiplash character in, I think, the Iron Man 1 line or something like that. Maybe it wasn't Whiplash. It was some other character similar to the
Titanium Man or something.
Yeah, Titanium Man. That's the one. And the point being that, of course, there was a Red Skull character in the most recent Captain America Winter Soldier line, as well as Baron Zemo. I mean, are you fucking kidding me, Baron Zemo? I mean, I know he's like
Captain America movie toy, guys. He was only an Axel Braun's Captain America.
That's true. It's just it's kind of ridiculous, and at the same time as it being just ridiculous and disrespectful to the X-Men, disrespectful to the Fantastic Four, it's nonsensical and hypocritical. It makes absolutely no marketing sense to essentially shoot your left foot off. I mean, the entire cast of the Avengers, and I'm talking the entire cast of Avengers 2, which is going to be like 9 characters deep, pales in comparison to the X-Men, the regular cast of the X-Men, which is got, like I said, anywhere from 12 to 15 characters in the regular cast proper. And then if you just spread out to other characters that are in the X-Men, which are going to be easy to do, and vehicles and anything else, they have no limit to the amount of toy sales that they could do, much less you're just good old-fashioned marketing of an X-Men backpack, X-Men cooler, an X-Men chest or something like that. I mean, I don't know. It absolutely boggles the mind. It absolutely is ludicrous for the most point. I don't understand why this is the case, and it's just they get a hard-on against Fox, and it's kind of ridiculous. But that's I've ranted significantly for the last like 10 minutes, so I guess I'll stop.
Yeah, I guess I'll take over here. I don't think I have really anything else to say about this. Of course, it's going to be an ongoing thing, like Batman versus Superman, which is still 2 years away, and definitely not the last time we'll talk about that film on the show. I'm guessing we will have quite a bit to talk about with Fox and Marvel as the Fantastic Four reboot draws near, and maybe possible comic book cancellations. But as I said earlier, the picture from the licensing expo, and then of course Superman's new suit, if you haven't seen it for some reason, will be included in the post of this over at multiverseentertainment.wordpress.com. Anyway, moving on, we heard something. This is kind of something for our listeners in the Metro Detroit area, or anyone who likes to venture to the area for conventions. Detroit Fan Fair, which is normally our fall convention here in the area at the Adobe Hotel in Dearborn, Michigan. We were expecting to hear announcements of new guests recently, and then our first announcement for the show is that it's delayed until February 2015. Now, that means, of course, there's no fanfare at all in 2014. Are there going to be two fanfares in 2015? I guess the con organizers know. We haven't publicly been given a reason for the delay. We probably won't. Maybe it was some dispute with the Adobe Hotel. Maybe they've changed venues. Hopefully, they're trying to work into a major celebrity schedule. I just hope that having a convention in Michigan in February, when it's going to be, abysmally cold, hopefully not as cold as it was this February with our, you know, polar vortex that was seemingly endless. But we just hope that doesn't deter guests from wanting to come to the Detroit area in the dead of winter. Um, I mean, fanfare, I've only been to two of them in one 2012, one in 2013, and the 2013 one had grown quite a bit from the previous year, so I wouldn't want to see their fifth outing be smaller in scale and less guests. I wouldn't want the convention to take a step back, so to speak, and say like, oh hey, here's two minor celebrities and then three notables from the comic industry, but we've got a ballroom full of unsigned artists. I've never heard of a convention being delayed, and don't misconstrue this. I'm not speaking ill of the convention at all. We're just perplexed, and we wanted to inform our listeners of the convention's delay. We might. There's also an upside and downside to this, but the thing was, it's not quite a halfway point to Motor City Comic Con because we really, unless you count anime conventions, there are really only two comic book conventions in the Detroit area that are of decent size. There's Detroit Fan Fair in the fall and Motor City Comic Con in the spring, and it's like I said, it's almost like a halfway point, so you've got something to satisfy your con fix, and we're not going to get that. I guess the upside of this is that when we leave fanfare in February, we're gonna be saying, oh, only 3 more months till Motor City Comic Con. Sometimes I envy people out in California when I see them on Facebook, and it seems like they have some kind of convention to go to once a month. I may go to UmaCon in early November, maybe on the Sunday because it's only $20. But not being an anime guy, there's not going to be too much for me to check out. But I want to do something con related this fall. Josh, your 2 cents on the whole fanfare deal.
Yeah, I mean, you already mentioned it. Yeah, for anyone who's in local Metro Detroit area, it's the two major cons are the Detroit Motor City Comic Con and then the Detroit Fanfare Convention, which is in Dearborn. And they cut the year in half pretty much. Granted, they're not completely 6 months apart from one another, but for the most part, they're close enough that it made it so there wasn't such a long period of time in between cons, and they're the two best cons locally. I know that there's one coming up in Grand Rapids in like November, and I'm sure that there are others in the northern part of the state, and obviously there are ones in the surrounding states, Ohio and Illinois and whatnot. But in terms of when I say locally, I mean there are some people that are unwilling to drive 4 or 5 hours to go to a con, and I'm one of those people for the most part, unless I'm making a vacation out of it. I know a couple buddies of mine are going to WonderCon in Chicago in August. So, and I was thinking about really considering going, but it's just money wise and then the amount of time that it takes to do things like that when you're really going to go out of town for a con. So it's a disappointment for local Metro Detroit fans. I'm not going to speak ill of it. I mean, hopefully it's a benefit. Hopefully they take that time to maybe it was moved because there was a venue issue. Maybe it was moved because they were hoping to get better media guests or better comic guests. And if it ends up being a boon, then hey, I'm all for it. Although I definitely don't want to be standing out in line waiting to get into the con if it turns out to be they get some gigantic media guest in the middle of February standing outside the hotel. That's for sure. But hopefully that won't be the case because it's a big enough internal lobby that you can usually wait inside. But other than that, no, nothing to say. How about we wrap up with new comics? What you been reading?
Yeah, this was a decent week for comics. July's going to be huge. I'm going to be doing quite a bit of reviewing this month, but as far as what I picked up this week physically at the shop, I got Batman 66 Meets the Green Hornet #2. You can read a brief review I did of it over at darknightnews.com. I didn't have as much time to review this one, so I kind of listed some bullet points, the finer points of the issue, you could say. Gave it a pretty favorable review, an 8.5 to spoil my review score there, but with the holiday weekend coming, I just wasn't able to put as much time into the review of it, but I had promised that was an issue I was going to review, so I did it. And I also picked up Batman Eternal. Was this week issue 13 or 14? I don't know, but it was probably my favorite read this week. That's been a pretty good series. I've been reading it here and there, but DCComics.com did a DC All Access bonus clip recently where they caught their fans up on issues 1 through 10, so I know all the basic plot points. So when issue 11 came out, yeah, maybe it was issue 12 this week, that I wasn't totally lost, but I'm definitely going to buy the next issue because Jason Fabok's drawing it. And then I also picked up Splinter Cell Echoes #1, which was a great read. Splinter Cell fans should definitely pick that up. It's a prequel to Blacklist. It was available as a limited edition book that came with a collector's edition of Blacklist a year ago. Now Dynamite Comics is releasing it as a 4-issue miniseries before releasing a mass market trade paperback in October. I'm definitely in for all 4 issues, but I finally got the Blacklist game. It's kind of funny because Splinter Cell games are normally a day one buy for me, but I just didn't have the money to get around to it at first. And, Blacklist was a pretty good game. I'm not going to go into a long-winded review of it, but it's kind of funny how I'm taking in the Blacklist timeline right now because I also picked up the Blacklist Aftermath novel by Peter Tellep, and I'm about halfway through it right now. So I finished what you would call Blacklist Present. I'm now reading the Aftermath, and piece by piece I'm going to be reading the prequel. So I'm all over that timeline, I guess. And then in the mail today, I just got the Fox Volume 1 Freak Magnet from Archie/Red Circle Comics. I'm going to try to blow through this tonight, maybe tomorrow morning. I'm about 2 chapters in, and you can hopefully expect to see a review of this on comicbookmovie.com. Just click under the review tab. Probably no later than Monday. I should have it up Sunday. We're recording the podcast on Saturday, July 5th. But it's been pretty entertaining. It's Mark Waid writes most of it, and how can you not like what Mark Waid does? I mean, we met him not last month, almost 2 months ago now at Motor City Comic Con, and he's one of course, the greatest writers in comics of the past quarter century. So I'm guessing that I'm going to give this book a glowing recommendation, but that's just my impression 2 chapters in right now. But I'm hoping to finish that Blacklist Aftermath article, but this is the first of at least 4 trade paperbacks I'm reviewing this month. 3 of them are going to be over at Dark Knight News. I can't spoil what those are going to be because I'm under embargo, but you can expect to see um, some trade reviews on July 15th, 22nd, and 30th, respectively. And that's not to say of any single issues I'm going to be sent from DC or Archie in the meantime between these weeks, because both those companies have various books that they want to get some press on, like Death of Archie's coming up this next week, and oh, in doubt if I get that. DC has various series launching this month, like Grayson, New Suicide Squad, Teen Titans, the Robin Rises one-shots coming out. There's some annuals, so it could be a very busy month for me reviewing books. Did you pick anything up this week, Josh?
Yeah, I actually just got books today. I haven't been to the shop in the last few weeks, but I picked up, and before we started, got to read Superman 32, which is Jeff Johns and John Romita Jr.'s debut issue on Superman. It was a really good title. I mean, I will say I wasn't blown away. It's definitely the start of an interesting story, and the story started off pretty good, which I like. Jeff Johns tells some pretty good stories. It's kind of a analogy of a Superman origin in and of itself, with some other characters, and it was pretty interesting. I picked up Action Comics 33, which is the start of the Superman Doomed arc. Haven't read that one yet. I'm probably going to read that when we get off the cast. It's got some pretty decent art from Aaron Cooter, who we met at Comic-Con, Motor City Comic-Con, and then picked up the final issue of the 0-year arc, Batman 32, and the most recent Superman Unchained. Got quite a few books this week, but I'm looking forward to Jeff Johns' run on Superman. We talked about that a little bit amongst ourselves, and Eric posted a review on the website. So I believe, did you post that one on DKN, or I can't remember?
Yeah, it was at Dark Knight News. I'm doing a new thing over there called Beyond the Bat. For anything DC sends me that's not Batman related will be under the headline Beyond the Bat, and I believe I gave Superman number 32 an 8.5 out of 10. Pretty good issue, and I was pretty excited when it was linked on DCComics.com. That was one of the highlights in my almost a year of being a freelance journalist. Before we get back to you about comics, Josh, this just jogged my memory. You were talking about the Doom storyline. Superman Wonder Woman will continue with this week. I saw a preview before we went on the air, but it looks like Tony Daniel's not doing interiors for this month's issue, just the cover. We know he's not doing August, just the cover, but it looks like he's already moved on to his Deathstroke work. For those who haven't heard, I did an article on Dark Knight News this week. Tony Daniel is doing a new Deathstroke series. He's writing and drawing it. It comes out October 1st or 22nd. It's in my article, but Tony Daniel on Deathstroke, definitely picking that up, but at the same time it's disappointing. Not anything bad to say about the artist filling in this month, but Tony Daniel's such a badass artist that it is kind of disappointing that when he's solicited for an issue, you pick it up and it's not him. But anyway, back to you about comics, Josh.
No, that was pretty much it. Yeah, I mean, I got quite a bit to read this week, and or rather today, for the last few weeks, and there's quite a bit of cool stuff happening in Superman, and obviously Batman as well. Justice League, Green Lantern's finishing up an arc over there, and I read a lot of titles, so it's hard to keep them all separated in my head. But I'd say the biggest movers and shakers right now, as far as DC is concerned, is definitely there's some big things happening in Superman, and it's going to be crossing over into a lot of his books. But that's it for me. We're over the hour, so actually let's wrap it up. Any last words, Eric?
Uh, I'm pretty much done. Just want to remind everyone to once again check out our blog page at multiverseentertainment.wordpress.com and to like us on Facebook at facebook.com/a-podcast for all seasons if you haven't already. As for a guest I was speaking about earlier, I mentioned her in a previous episode. I'll have to get in touch with her in a bit. Hopefully, Sarah Michelle, who was previously on the show, episode 5, I believe. We'd like to have her on for the next episode now that we've done a test run on my new computer and we know everything's running smoothly. So hopefully we'll have her on in episode 16, but if not, likely sometime after that. But she is, it looks like she's willing to do another podcast with us. But that's going to do it for me. Thanks for listening, everyone, and I'll turn it over to Josh for his closer.
Yeah, thanks for listening, guys. Definitely check out the pages, like us on Facebook, listen to watch some of our other videos if you haven't seen them all, and we'll be back shortly with more comic book news and movie news and all that good stuff that you guys like. Thanks for joining us, and take it easy.